I don't think there's any doubt that the new iteration of Microsoft Flight Simulator is an astounding technological accomplishment. I mean, this game was designed to be a demonstration of Microsoft's mastery of cloud computing, AI, and processing real-time, real-world data. And this demonstration has caught the eye of everyone who's interested in games. Critics have lauded the game for being the first thing that feels truly next-gen. PC builders have found a new crisis that they can benchmark systems against, and even the general gaming audience has been curious enough to give the game a spin.
Dude, what is this guy doing?
But for me, the real breakthrough with Flight Simulator 2020 isn't the nitty-gritty of how it uses cloud computing or how well it renders actual clouds. The real breakthrough is that this is the first game I've played that really feels like flying. Now, I know that sounds a little ridiculous saying this thing feels like the thing it's supposed to feel like, because
yeah, I sure hope it does.
But I mean it. Every other game I've played that has been designed to simulate flight hasn't quite sold me. Arcade-style flying games all feel kind of disconnected from actual aerodynamics, and earlier simulators have all felt kind of oversimplified. Nothing has fully suspended my disbelief and, for lack of a better word, immersed me in flying, but this game does. I mean, all I can say is that this game is what I imagine it feels like in the cockpit when I'm sitting in seat 32B on an airliner. But I don't think the feeling this game provides is too far removed from the real thing. Real pilots seem to be pretty impressed by it.
So what is your overall sort of review on the simulator itself? What do you think about it?
I think it's great. I think the graphics are great, but I think for the more complex aircraft, it's more investigation needed to be able to set it up and fly it properly.
Definitely, blowing my mind. It's so immersive. I was super impressed with the overall, the flight controls and the scenery and the graphics and everything.
Hey guys, I'm genuinely more excited about flying this on my days off and going to work at the moment. Unbelievable to say that, but what a wicked simulator this looks like. VFR, certainly what we just did there, it's going to be phenomenal.
I think 3 things contribute to the feeling this game creates. The first is pretty obvious. It's that for the first time, the ground really looks like the ground, no matter where you are. Not only is this an upgrade to near photorealism from, sure, I guess that's a tree, but there's also something really jarring about looking out the window of a virtual plane and seeing the same sights that you've seen out the window of a real plane. Seth Macy, in IGN's review, talks about visiting places in Flight Simulator that he hadn't flown over since his time in the Air Force, and actually saying out loud, "Holy shit, I remember this." And this level of realism is more than just a nice feature to have. It's something that enables flying like you would in real life. One of the 2 major ways pilots navigate is VFR, or Visual Flight Rules, which requires locating landmarks on the ground and using them to know where to fly. And because the entire Earth is mapped in this game, you can use VFR to fly anywhere in the world. Obviously, the tech that powers this hasn't been perfect so far. There have been some pretty noticeable glitches, but the level of realism the game provides is convincing enough to trick my brain, even on the lower graphical settings my old PC requires. The next thing that makes Flight Simulator feel like flying is the way it simulates the actual physics of flight. Just like the graphics in this game went from simple to complex, the way the game models aerodynamics went through a similar level of advancement. There's a whole video made by the Flight Simulator team that breaks down all the advancements this game makes in the flight model, but my basic takeaway was that instead of simulating the way air is flying over one point, like Flight Simulator did in the past, this version simulates how air travels over a series of points on the plane, reflecting the twisting and turbulence that real planes experience. This game does way more than that though. It also simulates the way air flows over mountains, the friction of tires on different types of earth, all sorts of things. But the important thing about that is that you can feel all of those things when you're at the controls. Just look at takeoff in Flight Simulator X, the previous version of Flight Simulator. It's pretty smooth and easy. But in Flight Simulator 2020, you can see the air pushing and twisting different parts of the plane. Now, to be fair, Flight Simulator isn't the only program out there that models aerodynamics like this. I'm sure there are some hardcore flight simmers out there that will say X-Plane does an equally good or better job with its flight model. And it might. I've never played it, so I can't judge. This is the Flight Simulator that's on Xbox Game Pass, so that's why I played it. Finally, the last thing that makes Flight Simulator really feel like flying has gotten the least attention, but it might actually make the biggest difference. It's the intuitive way the game's default controls are set up. One of the biggest things that frustrated me about the last iteration of Flight Simulator X, was its controls. Most actions were mapped to the keyboard, the camera controls were slow and awkward, and accessing menus was done by right-clicking on the screen? I mean, come on, really? But Flight Simulator 2020 has streamlined all of that. There are still plenty of controls mapped to the keyboard, but the new fully interactive cockpits make it much easier and more intuitive to just look at a switch and flip it. Plus, it's a lot easier to look at the controls thanks to the way the camera works now. Free Look is now mapped to the right-click button, so you can just click and drag your mouse to look around, or you can smoothly switch between different camera presets by using a key combination or flicking the hat switch on top of most joysticks. Plus, the primary buttons on most joysticks are now also used for camera movement. The trigger button focuses your view on your next waypoint, and the thumb button resets the camera in its main position. It was a great call for the creators of this game to map the camera controls to such dominant keys. The simple act of flicking the hat switch up to get a better view out of your windshield, or left and right to check your position, is a lot closer to the instinctual act of moving your head than the controls have been in any earlier version. Accessing menus is also quicker and easier. A small bar appears when you move your cursor to the top of the screen, and you get simple icons for common menus. Anything you need to do is found here. There's no need to memorize key presses or look through a right-click menu. When you put all of these controls together, you get an experience that's a lot easier to pick up and play than Flight Simulator has been in the past. Between the realism and the intuitive controls, this game is as close to flying a plane as I've ever come. But those advancements also highlight the main downside of Flight Simulator that still exists after all these years. You still have to know how to fly a plane to really play it. Don't get me wrong, this game offers way more assistance than previous games did. Checklists are now interactive and they show you what switch to flip or what gauge to check. That's a huge help. There are also now little notifications that pop up when you're doing something that could damage the plane, like going too fast. If you need to, you can give full control of the plane over to an AI co-pilot. And of course, there is a training section of the game where a disembodied voice teaches you the basics of takeoff, landing, and VFR navigation. But even after you complete the training and find the autocomplete checklists and all of that, the game still doesn't explain many of the rules of flying. I find myself wishing there was some sort of coach you could turn on that would explain if you're doing the right things or not. Like, take the logic of the full AI co-pilot and just tell me if I'm doing what it would do. And maybe we'll see that in the future. Microsoft has said that this iteration of Flight Simulator is a 10-year project, so we're just scratching the surface of what this game could become. But no matter what happens, all of that is icing. The core of this game, the result of all the amazing technology that they've pumped into it, is that eerily believable recreation of what real-life, real-world flight feels like. What I've always wanted from Flight Simulator, ever since I played Flight Simulator for Windows 95 on my family's gateway computer, was a chance to taste what it's like to fly a plane, to experience that feeling. And 2020's Flight Simulator, it delivers that.